Red clouds tore across the sky like scars. Thunder rolled in slow, rumbling waves, echoing through the jagged obsidian mountains that surrounded the great training arena of the Yautja. Massive torches burned in tall stone towers, throwing trembling gold light over the circular coliseum where young warriors sparred, trained, and proved again and again that they deserved to exist. Among the towering figures stood a smaller shape, lean, quick, but undeniably smaller. Deck, only 17 seasons old, a runt by Yautja standards. But in his eyes, something burned with more strength than the other's muscles, relentless determination. He stood alone at the edge of the arena, mask in his hands, watching the other initiates slam into each other, their armor clashing with deep thuds. He wanted to join them. He wanted to be one of them. He wanted, desperately, to belong. A shadow appeared beside him. Quay, his older brother, taller by nearly 2 heads, stronger by a lifetime. His armor glowed faintly from recent training, and his mask hung from his side KWEI, soft, almost whispering, "You don't have to do this today." Deck inhaled slowly, steadying his thoughts. Deck, if I don't, the clan will never see me as a hunter. Quay placed a large clawed hand on Deck's shoulder, a gesture rare among their species. Quay, you have strength you don't recognize yet. I see it. Deck looked up at him, grateful, but he didn't have the luxury of accepting comfort. Not today, because today everything would change. The arena suddenly fell silent as the heavy gates opened. A gust of cold air swept through the stone corridors. Footsteps followed, slow, heavy, commanding. The torches dimmed as the massive figure approached Njord, clan leader, warlord, father.
He walked with the authority of someone who had conquered 100 worlds. His armor was carved with ancient runes, each marking a victory. His mask was a terrifying horned design, the symbol of their lineage. He stopped in front of Deck and Quay. A hush fell across the entire arena. Njohar, voice deep and final. This ends today. Deck swallowed hard. Quay stepped slightly between them. Quay, father, Njord's arm shot out, grabbing Quay's shoulder, pushing him aside with effortless strength. Njord, you defend the weak, you shame our bloodline. Deck's chest tightened, but he kept his posture straight. He would not show fear. Not here, not now. Deck, I only want to prove myself. Let me take the trials. Let me hunt. Njord leaned forward, mask inches from Deck's face. Njord, you are not a hunter. You are a mistake. Gasps echoed among the young warriors. Quay clenched his fists, trembling with anger. Njord turned to him. Njord, kill him. The words slammed into the arena like a meteor. Deck froze.
Deck, whispering. What? Quay shook his head slowly, disbelief turning to horror. Quay, no. I will never harm him. Njord stepped forward, towering over both of them. Njord! Then you die with him. Quay's eyes flicked to Deck. In a split second, without hesitation, he reached behind his belt and pressed a hidden trigger. A distant roar echoed from the hangar. Deck turned just as a transport pod, their small training ship, activated automatically, engines igniting, doors opening. Deck, hey, Quay, what did you... Quay grabbed Deck's arm and pulled him toward the pod. Quay, speaking fast. You can't win here. You can't change him, but you can survive. Deck struggled. Deck, no, I won't leave you. Quay shoved him inside, sealing the door. Quay, you will. You must. Njord stormed forward, fury building like a storm. Deck pounded on the window. Deck, Quay, don't do this. Quay backed away, raising his head with dignity. For the first time, Deck saw fear in his brother's eyes. Not fear of dying, fear of leaving Deck alone. KWAI, lips barely moving. Live, brother. The pod blasted upward. Deck's hand slid down the window as the arena shrank beneath him. His breath caught as he saw Njord raise his blade. Deck! No! But the pod was already hurtling skyward. He could not look away. He could not stop it. He could only watch. And as the pod broke through the clouds, Deck's world shattered. Darkness swallowed him. Crash landing on Jenna Deck woke to alarms blaring and red emergency lights flashing.
The pod rattled violently as it entered orbit around an unknown world, his vision blurred as systems failed one by one. POD warning, hull integrity compromised, impact imminent. Deck gritted his teeth and strapped himself to the restraint harness, pulling his mask tightly over his face. The pod plunged into Jenna's atmosphere like a burning meteor.
Wind screamed, metal groaned, trees rushed upward. The pod smashed through thick branches before hitting the ground with a deafening crash. Debris scattered. Sparks flew. The door blasted open, releasing a burst of smoke. Deck stumbled out, coughing, his armor cracked, mask flickering. He looked around and froze. Jenna was unlike anything he'd trained for. Plants glowed faintly with neon veins. Trees twisted into spirals. The sky swirled with turquoise and green clouds. Strange bird-like creatures circled overhead, their wings translucent like living crystals. Deck's visor scanned automatically. Environment, hazardous atmosphere, breathable threats, unknown. Deck steadied his breathing. He was alive. He was alone. And he was hunting the most dangerous creature he'd ever heard of, the Kalisk. But he had nothing. No weapons, no gear, no backup, only the planet itself. He stepped deeper into the forest. The first encounter.
The deeper Deck walked, the stranger Jenna felt. The flora shifted subtly as he passed, reacting to his presence. Vines retracted, leaves vibrated. At one point, a flower opened suddenly, releasing a spray of shimmering dust. Deck leapt back, instinctively shielding his face. His visor analyzed the particles. Non-toxic reactive pollen avoid inhalation. He moved onward. A low rumble vibrated the ground. Deck froze. Another rumble. Something massive moved through the forest, shaking entire trees. Deck climbed onto a large rock, heart pounding. Though he refused to show fear, a shadow swept across the ground, tremendous, slow, purposeful. Through the glowing leaves, Deck glimpsed scales the size of shields, and a single glowing eye like molten gold. The creature turned. Deck held his breath. The creature sniffed the air, then moved on. Deck lowered himself slowly. He had just encountered something nearly the size of a small ship, and that was not the Kalisk. This planet was worse than he imagined.
The synthetic hours passed. Deck collected materials, stone, fibers, hardened sap, to craft primitive weapons. Yautja tradition required skill, not just technology he could adapt. As night fell, the forest lit up with bioluminescent colors, blue, green, purple. Small insects drifted like floating lanterns. Deck followed a faint signal on his visor, an artificial energy source. He arrived at a clearing. A half-destroyed human research pod lay on its side, wires sparking around it, scorch marks, evidence of a violent encounter. Deck advanced cautiously. A faint voice drifted from inside. Voice system. Reboot. Incomplete. Deck's mask brightened. Scanning inside the pod lay a humanoid figure, silver, metallic, with synthetic skin damaged and torn. Her lower half was missing entirely. Cables hung loosely where her legs should be. Her eyes flickered open. THIA, soft, mechanical. You're not human. Deck stepped back, raising his staff. The synthetic raised her hands slowly. THIA.
If you wanted to harm me, you would have done it already. Deck remained silent, analyzing her movements. Thea. My name is Thea. Wayland Yutani Synthetic Unit. Designation T8 Prototype. Deck didn't respond. Thea tilted her head. Thea, you're young, smaller than the others, but your heart beat, steady, disciplined. Deck bristled at the mention of his size. Thea continued. Thea, my team came here hunting the Kalisk. They didn't survive. Deck's eyes narrowed. Deck, voice deep, filtered through mask. Why should I trust you? Thea gave a faint, almost human smile. Thea, because you need help. And so do I, she gestured to her missing legs. Thea, if you help me retrieve my lower half, I can help you find what you're looking for. Deck paused.
He didn't trust her, but he remembered Quay's last words. Live. He extended a hand. Thea took it. A yautja and a synthetic. Unlikely allies on a deadly world. Above them, leaves rustled. Something was watching. The glowing flora brightened into a neon jungle, every plant shimmering with energy, every branch humming with a soft vibration. The air felt alive. Dec paused several times just to observe how the wind triggered patterns of light, like ripples on water. Thea watched him with her flickering blue eyes, still half-powered due to the damage in her torso wiring. Thea, curiously, your heart rate increases when you observe the forest's reactions. Are you afraid? Or impressed? Dec tightened the grip on his staff. Dec, observing, not feeling. Thea smiled faintly. Thea, that's what you say. But I'm designed to read micro-movements. Even yautja masks cannot hide everything. Dec turned away. She was annoyingly perceptive. They moved through the glowing forest, Thea crawling forward using her arms while Dec cleared the path. He scanned ahead constantly, his visor revealing heat signatures and movement patterns. A sudden flutter made him halt. Thea froze instantly.
Out of the branches, dozens of small winged creatures lifted into the air, scattering like drifting lights. Their wings shimmered in blue and orange hues. Thea beautiful. Dec didn't disagree, but he kept scanning. Dec beauty does not mean safety. Thea hummed as if amused. Thea. Spoken like someone raised for survival, Dec didn't respond. His eyes were fixed on a particular tree, its bark glowing from inside, like molten lava beneath the surface. He placed a hand on it. The light reacted to his touch, pulsing softly. Thea crawled closer. Thea Jenna responds to bioelectrical signatures. The planet is sensitive. Dec nodded, storing the information. Every detail mattered. 2. The first test. They moved for another hour before reaching the area. Thea's internal compass indicated a broken clearing stretched ahead. Massive claw marks raked across the ground, carving trenches several feet deep. Huge trees lay snapped like twigs. Dec crouched. Dec, something fought here. Fought.
Thea's senses lit up with faint signals. Chia, my team was ambushed in this area. Those readings belong to Wayland-Yutani leg components. Dec moved ahead carefully, examining the terrain. A strange paste-like substance clung to the ground, dark, thick, and sticky. His visor scanned it. Unknown, organic resin, non-corrosive, potent scent marker. Dec wiped it off. Dec, a territorial warning. Te-ye, quietly, from the Kalisk. Dec stood and stared at the claw marks. They were massive. If the creature could gouge stone like dirt, this would be more than a hunt. It would be a test of worth. Dec inhaled, steadying himself. He remembered Nyor's cold words. Mistake. Unworthy. Weak. He refused to let those words define him. Dec, we retrieve your legs. Then we find the Kalisk. Thaye. A logical plan. For once, I agree completely. But before they could move forward, a sound echoed through the clearing. A soft chirp. Both froze. Another chirp. Higher. From behind a tree, the small bioluminescent creature from earlier peeked out, eyes bright, ears twitching, curious. Thea gasped in delight. Thea, you again. See, Dec? He followed us. Dec frowned. Dec, it's a local creature. Unpredictable. The creature crawled out completely, tiny and playful, its body a mix of soft fur and luminous patches that pulsed like fireflies. Dec nudged it away gently with his staff. Dec. Go. This place is dangerous. The creature licked Dec's hand. Thea clapped her hands. Thea. I believe you officially have a fan, Dec sighed. Dec. No. The creature chirped happily. Thea. I'm naming him Bud. Dec. No. Thea. Too late. Bud leaped into her arms, nuzzling under her chin. Dec shook his head and resumed scanning the area. Bud. Whatever it was, could complicate things. But for now, it seemed harmless. 3. Finding the legs. Thea finally located the exact signal. They reached a rocky basin where metal debris glittered under moonlight. Broken scanners, melted armor plates, shattered exosuit pieces, and
Thea's legs. They lay tangled in vines, half buried in glowing moss. Their sleek metallic design was now dull, scratched, dented from impact. Thea exhaled softly, a very human-sounding relief. Thea, you found them. Dek crouched and pulled the legs free, shaking off debris. Dek, they're intact. Thea mostly. Thank you. Dek looked away awkwardly. Dek, we need to get you fully mobile. Standing will improve your efficiency. THIA, efficiency. Right. Dek began attaching the legs, threading wires, locking plates, reconnecting the synthetic spine column. The clicks and whirs echoed through the clearing. Thea watched him. Hi, you're surprisingly gentle for someone raised to hunt. Dek paused. For a moment he remembered Quay's face, the push, the last goodbye, the silhouette of their father. He said nothing.
When the last panel locked, Thea stood for the first time in days. She took a cautious step, then another. Stability returned to her movements. She spun once and she laughed, a brief, bright sound that seemed completely out of place on a deadly planet. Dek's mask hid his expression, but Thea noticed his slight shift in posture. Thea, is that amusement? Dek, move. We have work. Thea smirked. They began walking, Bud hopping behind them cheerfully. 4 footprints and shadows. As they traveled deeper into the forest, Dek noticed unusual distortions along the ground. Footprints so deep they formed miniature canyons. He scanned one. Creature mass, extreme estimated height, unknown movement, pattern, unpredictable. Thea knelt beside him. Thea, these prints aren't from the bone bison, or any animal in my databanks. Dek placed a hand over the print. It dwarfed his entire arm. Dek Kalisk. Thea's internal processors hummed as she ran her database. Cha, it regenerates from nearly any wound.
It adapts quickly, and it becomes more aggressive when separated from its young. Dek froze. Dek. It's young? Thea tapped her sensors. Thea. The creature Bud resembles. Their genetic markers are extremely similar. Dek turned slowly toward Bud. Bud chirped, unaware of the tension. Deke. He's a juvenile. Thea nodded. Thea, the Kalisk, is searching for him. A distant rumble echoed through the forest. The ground shuddered. Bud whimpered and hid behind Dek's leg. Dek tightened his grip on the staff. Deke, then we move, now. They hurried forward, but the forest grew darker, denser. Thick branches overlapped, blocking the neon moonlight. Strange clicking sounds came from above. Dek aimed his visor upward, switching vision modes. Dozens of heat signatures crawled across the branches, thin, spidery creatures moving silently. Thea life forms above us. Not hostile yet, but watchful. Dek moved cautiously. One of the creatures hissed softly. Bud squeaked.
Thea placed a reassuring hand on the small creature's head. Thea, stay close. They stepped into a large clearing surrounded by ancient stone pillars. Runes glowed faintly, symbols Dek barely recognized. Dek, this is Yautja script. Thea scanned them. Thea, older than your clan. This place is a hunting ground. Dek crouched near one of the symbols. It depicted a predator holding a staff, facing a giant beast with glowing marks. Dek, the Kalisk. Our ancestors hunted it too. Thea gazed at the carvings, her eyes flooding with new data. Thea, Dek. This creature has existed for thousands of years. It adapts, it learns hunters' patterns. It is not prey, it is an apex. Dek rose slowly. Dek, everything can be brought down. Everything. Thea looked at him, not dismissively, not mockingly, but with an expression that resembled admiration before she could respond. Bud stiffened. His glowing fur dimmed. Thea noticed. Thea. He senses something. Dek scanned the tree line. Nothing. No heat signatures.
No movement. Total silence. Too silent. A soft vibration tickled Dek's feet. He crouched, placed his hand on the earth. The vibration grew, then stopped. Thea, Dek. The forest held its breath. Then, a roar shook the entire clearing. 5. The Kalisk appears. Trees parted, light fractured across massive, shifting scales. The Kalisk stepped forward, towering, breathing heavy, its glowing eyes locked on Deck. Deck straightened, holding his staff firm. He did not step back. Thea stood slightly behind him, shielding Bud with her body. The Kalisk moved one step closer. Deck felt the weight of its presence, not just size, but something deeper, something intelligent, something ancient. It lowered its head slightly, studying him. Deck's mask analyzed rapidly. Kalisk. Primary target warning. High evolution rate danger level. Extreme. Thea whispered, Thea, Deck. Don't provoke it. Deck didn't move. He slowly lifted his staff in a defensive stance. The Kalisk's eyes narrowed. Bud whined softly, trembling.
The creature stepped closer again, each step sounding like distant thunder. Deck's stance never faltered. For a moment, the creature simply stared into his mask, as if judging him. Then the ground vibrated again. The Kalisk turned and vanished back into the forest. Not running, not afraid, just gone. Deck exhaled slightly. Thea touched his arm. Thea, I think it recognized something in you. Deck, it spared me. Thea, or it's waiting, studying you like a hunter, choosing the right moment. Deck looked into the dark forest. The Kalisk wasn't avoiding him. It was evaluating him, testing him. And that made Deck's blood burn with both fear and fire.
If you wanted to harm me, you would have done it already. Deck remained silent, analyzing her movements. Thaya. My name is Thaya. Wayland Yutani Synthetic Unit. Designation. T8 Prototype. Deck didn't respond. Thea tilted her head. Thea, you're young, smaller than the others, but your heartbeat, steady, disciplined. Deck bristled at the mention of his size. Thea continued. Thea, my team came here hunting the Kalisk. They didn't survive. Deck's eyes narrowed. Deck, voice deep, filtered through mask. Why should I trust you? Thea gave a faint, almost human smile. Thea, because you need help, and so do I. She gestured to her missing legs. Thea, if you help me retrieve my lower half, I can help you find what you're looking for. Deck paused. He didn't trust her, but he remembered Quay's last words. Live. He extended a hand. Thea took it. A yautja and a synthetic, unlikely allies on a deadly world. Above them, leaves rustled. Something was watching. Deck felt the air hum long after the Kalisk vanished. The forest seemed to settle into a wary silence, as if even the plants were watching. He stayed where he was, staff tight in both hands, pulse steadying in the slow, practiced way of someone who had been trained to breathe through danger. Thea crouched beside him, her synthetic fingers touching the earth in a gesture that looked almost like prayer. Thea, soft. It was not a simple creature it measures, it remembers. Deck swallowed. He had always been taught that beasts were overcome through force and cunning. The idea that a living thing could study him, weigh him, and decide when to act gnawed at him. Deck. It could have killed us. It didn't. Thaya, no. It chose not to. That is meaningful. Either it does not see you as immediate prey, or it intends to use you. Deck's brow creased. The thought that the Kalisk might be using him, testing him, was a new kind of threat. He did not yet know how to read that.
As they moved on, Bud kept close to Thea's legs, eyes bright and tongue flicking. The small creature had become a quiet presence that eased the edges of danger. They pressed further into the forest, toward a signal cluster that Thea had been tracking, intermittent drone beacons and faint heat signatures consistent with Wayland Yutani scav units. The company's presence meant two things, danger and data. It also meant the possibility of intel on where the main Kalisk might be held or studied. 2 tracks, traps, and lessons. Deck took the lead, his instincts sharper now. He had begun to notice the planet's little patterns, the way certain plants bent to channel water, how the moss glowed brighter near hollow rocks where predators nested, and how the air tasted slightly metallic near old human-made structures. He paused at a shallow trench. Freshly disturbed soil. He moved a fingertip across a groove and felt something sticky on his glove. The scent was faint but distinct, machine oil mixed with organic secretion. Dick Wayland traces, not recent, but not ancient. Thaya, there was a capture here. My team fought.
They were efficient, for a while. Deck considered the possibilities. If the company had been capturing Kalisk specimens, they were likely to have left behind fortifications. He scanned the area with his visor, temperature differentials, recent heat pockets, slight magnetic anomalies. Hidden cam nodes blinked where vines draped over metal. He could feel a faint digital echo. Deck, we should move carefully. They may have left sensors, or worse, automatic traps. Thea fitted a sensor patch on Deck's harness, an improvisation that pulsed softly. She jacked into it, calibrating the makeshift suite to Jenna's idiosyncrasies. I can detect artificial fields up to 300 meters. If the company left a perimeter, I'll find it. They continued, stepping through thick brush and around the collapsed remains of a half-buried transport. Deck tapped at a plate with his staff. It pinged like thin metal. The air tasted of ozone and burnt polymer. A rusted awning creaked as them passed.
Bud stopped and sniffed aggressively at a hollow. It made a small warning chitter, and Deck's hair rose on the back of his neck. A trap. Not lethal for large beasts, but designed to ensnare. Sticky gels coated with a fine narcotic mist. It would slow a predator or render a synthetic's locomotion impaired. DK careful. Deck used his staff to sweep a path, clearing triggers. He moved like a ghost through old technology and living jungle, adapting Yautja techniques to unfamiliar terrain. Thea watched him, impressed, her processors logging his decisions. Chia, you think like a hunter, not only in strength, but in patience. Deck's jaw tightened. Compliment or analysis, it landed the same. He had been taught that the jungle would be merciless. Here, the jungle was exquisite and cruel at once. 3. The wrecked camp. They reached a clearing that had once been a field lab tent, now shredded, hung from skeletal frames. A half-broken drone lay on its side, camera glass webbed with cracks.
A rusted service mech, its arm frozen in mid-reach, bore scorch scars. Boot prints and claw marks marred the mud, alongside strange chemical stains. Thea dipped her palm into a puddle of iridescent liquid and frowned. She pulled up a small data stick from the muck and wiped it clean. Her eyes blinked faster as she decrypted fragments of a corrupted log. Quiet. We were tracking the Kalisk for bioweapons teams. The plan was to harvest regenerative tissue. Extraction protocols were in place. They underestimated the creature. Deck scanned the horizon. On the far edge of the clearing, hiding behind a collapsed solar tower, a strip of polished metal glinted. A fresh patch. He crept forward, staff low, and wiped the dirt away with his gloved hand. It was the edge of a containment cage, a collapsible lattice designed to stop massive beasts. Someone had tried to close it. Then something broke it from the inside. DEK. They tried to cage it. It escaped. THIA, and they retreated. A and they.
Possibly to the main study facility. They always retreat to their strongholds. Behind the fallen tech, Deck found a small, scorched datapad with a name stamped on it. Wayland Yutani. The same corporate sigil was hot on the equipment. A new concern settled into Deck's chest. The company was methodical. Capturing a live Kalisk would be a marquee achievement, scientifically enormous. But the company's tools weren't made for reverence. They were made for control and profit. DK, they will come back. They will bring better tools. Thai, they will also try to replicate the Kalisk's regenerative properties. That is the real threat. Deck swallowed. He pictured what Nyor had said, weak, mistake, and felt his temper flare in the way only Yautja pride could. Deck, then we stop them. Thea regarded him, seeing something that might have been hunger for battle and something softer, an ember of loyalty.
The hunt converges. They set off along the company's faint trail, following the pattern of heat signatures that Thea could detect. It led uphill, out of the glowing jungle and into a stark, rocky ridge accented with crystalline growths. The air here felt thinner, the terrain harsher. The Kalisk's tracks were clear, deep gouges, flattened brush lines, and droppings larger than any wild boar Deck had ever seen. For hours they followed, moving silently, conserving energy.
Dec learned to move with the forest's rhythm. Step into the hollow where leaves don't squeak. Place your weight where the moss won't give. Listen to the breath of the planet. He found a patient, quiet method he'd never used amongst the arena's brutal sparring. Around midday, they punctured the ridge and found a shelf, a plateau overlooking a valley where metal containers sat in a rough perimeter. The company's mobile lab was there, reassembled from field components. Armed sentry bots circled like metallic jackals.
Men in armored suits moved in careful patterns. Dec crouched with them, watching. The lab housed something enormous inside an open pen. A dark shape moved with slow, powerful motions. Even at a distance, the Kalisk's presence felt like a low drumbeat.
It was not alone. Other smaller creatures milled near the pen, curious and watchful. High, calm, urgent. They have the Kalisk. It's wounded, likely from skirmishes. They may be experimenting. Dec's chest tightened. This was the test that would define him, not just proving skill, but defying a corporation that treated living beings as resources. Deke, we don't have heavy weapons, Thyano, but we have time, terrain, stealth, and knowledge. She tapped at a handheld interface she'd salvaged and then whispered a plan. It involved using the ridge for cover, setting traps that used the planet's biology, sticky resin, amplified sound channels, and phased light interference that would confuse synthetic optics.
The plan relied on Dec's agility and Thea's capacity to intercept and override scanning frequencies. Dec listened. It was precise. It was dangerous. It was a hunt in reverse, not to corner the beast, but to free it and disrupt the hunters. Dec, and if we fail? Thea's eyes locked with his, steady and unyielding. Thea, then we die, but we try anyway. Dec felt something like fear and excitement knot together, two halves of the same coin. He nodded. They descended toward the company camp at dusk, when shadows could be used as shields and sentries grew lax. Bud padded at their heels, oddly still and silent now, sensing the tension. The three of them slipped like shadows toward the pens, the Yautja, the synthetic, and the small glowing creature that had chosen them. 5 night preparations. Night on the ridge came in cold, sharp waves. Dec moved like a machine forged into a living stencil, fast, precise, and economical.
He set snares below loose rocks, layered sticky resins in a narrow pass the guards would have to use, and carved false footprints to mislead thermal sensors. Thea crawled into the company's peripheral networking cluster and began to whisper false signatures, ghost images that would redirect patrol drones. Bud helped in its way, squeaking softly and nudging loose pebbles into position, a small comet of light moving underfoot. Dec worked with a focus that made the hours melt by. As he tied the last trap, he thought of Quay, his brother's face burning under the arena's torches, and felt an old ache, a fierce promise. He would not return home as the same runt who had been pushed into the void. He would return with proof of worth. Thea rejoined him, her synthetic frame humming with new energy. She had managed to spoof at least one security feed, buying them a narrow window. Thea window, 32 minutes. The company routine repeats here at intervals.
We exploit the blind spot, Dec, then we move fast. As they crept down toward the perimeter, Dec allowed himself one small, dangerous thought. The hunt in his blood had shifted. It no longer was about earning a place among the strong. It was about protecting what could not protect itself. He slotted his hand into his staff and pulled the blade, a primitive edge, but honed and clean. He smiled, a small predator grin that had nothing to do with arrogance and everything to do with resolve. They slipped past a patrol. Dec's breathing matched the forest. Thea's servos whispered as she crawled through vents, and Bud, small and bright, distracted a scanner by hopping out into the open and darting away. The bot chased the glittering dot, spinning in confusion. The trio moved. At the outer pen, through gaps in the lattice, Dec saw the Kalisk. It lay partly slumped, its hide marked by scorch and seam-like wounds that pulsed faintly. It lifted its head, nostrils flaring.
Its golden eye found them for a single heartbeat, and Dek saw recognition sparking in the abyss of that gaze. Then the alarm began to scream, sharp, mechanical, sudden. Thaya swore, and plans collapsed into instinct. Dek tightened his grip and prepared to run into the teeth of it, because now the hunt was no longer his alone. If you wanted to harm me, you would have done it already. Dek remained silent, analyzing her movements. Thyami name is Thea. Wayland, Yutani synthetic unit. Designation, T8, prototype. Dek didn't respond. Thea tilted her head. Thaye, you're young, smaller than the others, but your heartbeat, steady, disciplined. Dek bristled at the mention of his size. Thea continued, Thyami team came here hunting the Kalisk. They didn't survive. Dek's eyes narrowed. Dek, voice deep, filtered through mask. Why should I trust you?
Thea gave a faint, almost human smile. Thaya, because you need help, and so do I. She gestured to her missing legs. Thaya, if you help me retrieve my lower half, I can help you find what you're looking for. Dek paused. He didn't trust her, but he remembered Quay's last words. Live, he extended a hand. Thea took it. A yautja and a synthetic, unlikely allies on a deadly world. Above them, leaves rustled. Something was watching. As they moved on, Bud kept close to Thea's legs, eyes bright and tongue flicking. The small creature had become a quiet presence that eased the edges of danger. 1. Alarm in the dark. The alarm split the night like a streak of lightning. Red lights flooded the Wayland Yutani camp, flashing across steel crates and tented labs. Drone sentries rose from their docks with a synchronized whir, their searchlights sweeping the dirt. Human voices shouted orders. The valley below came alive with motion. Dek didn't flinch. He had grown up in an arena where chaos was a training exercise. His heartbeat remained steady. His mask switched modes, thermal, motion tracking, sound mapping, until the world resolved into patterns he could read like language. Thea crouched low beside him, internal lights pulsing with active computations. Thea. Someone tripped a proximity net. Might not be us. Could be wildlife. Dek's gaze flicked to Bud. The little creature hid behind a rock, trembling but silent. Dek. We stick to the plan.
He pressed his back against a cargo container, sliding along its length unseen. Thea followed. They moved like an old instinct, a unit, not perfect, but aligned by purpose. Below, a squad of helmeted soldiers marched toward the pen where the Kalisk lay. At the cage, a head scientist barked, "Prepare for sedation cycle." Dek's pulse sharpened. If they sedated the Kalisk again, freeing it might become impossible. DEK. We move now. Thea nodded and tapped quickly at her wrist module. A spark of blue shot into the air, silent, invisible. And the nearest drone's flight pattern glitched. It spun a full circle, confused, then powered down and crashed into the dirt. 2 soldiers ran toward the noise. Dek slid behind them unseen. 2. Into the labyrinth. Dek motioned for Thea to follow him deeper into the camp. They slipped into the shadows between stacked supply crates. Mud clung to Dek's boots as he ducked beneath a raised walkway. Thea crawled under a dangling cable and paused Thea. Dek, 3 guards approaching. Energy rifles, low burst type. Dek didn't answer. He scanned the ceiling of the walkway above them. A lattice of supporting wires ran through the beams. He whispered, Dek, when they cross, disable the lights. Thea nodded. Bud squeezed itself into a narrow gap between 2 rocks. Footsteps thudded on metal above them. Thea snapped a thin fiber cable with her fingers. The lights above flickered. Once, twice, then went black. Confusion. Shouts. Dek leapt. Not to attack, to distract. He hit the walkway lightly, his landing so silent that only the faintest metallic grind gave him away. A guard spun and fired, the beam grazing the railing. Dek darted left, making sure the shot missed him on purpose. He wanted their eyes on him. The guards scrambled after him. Below, Thea slithered forward toward the research lab, while the walkway erupted with running boots overhead.
Dek led the guards through the maze of scaffolding, slipping around corners with calculated misdirection. He made noise where he wanted them to look, stayed silent where he wanted them blind. His movements were fast but controlled, no violence, just evasion.
He dove off a ledge and rolled through soft moss, brushing dirt from his armor as the guards continued chasing him deeper into the shadows. They had taken the bait. 3. Thea finds the truth. Inside the small research station, Thea shut the door silently behind her. The interior glowed with sterile blue light monitors lined the walls, displaying bioscans of the Kalisk, heart rate, regenerative spikes, neural patterns. A hologram rotated in a display chamber, the creature's skeletal structure, muscles highlighted in neon strands. Thea stared, processing. Each regeneration wave consumed enormous metabolic energy. Wayland Yutani wanted to synthesize it. She moved to a console, ignoring the warning label.
Authorized personnel only. Violation punishable. Her fingers danced across the panel, code scrolled. Access layers peeled open. Recordings appeared. The head scientist speaking into a log. Log entry. Day 6. The Kalisk possesses unprecedented regenerative potential. Samples reform faster than we can analyze if we succeed. This will be the medical revolution of the century. Log entry. Day 7. We captured a juvenile specimen, possibly connected. The adult is extremely agitated. We believe it's searching for the younger one. Thea's chest tightened. Bud. She turned, eyes finding the tiny creature curled beneath a desk, shivering Thea softly. You poor thing. She crouched and brushed his fur gently. Bud pressed his face into her palm. Then another file auto-opened. Log entry. Day 8. The juvenile escaped. The adult has tried to break the pen twice. We must increase sedation levels. Thea's processors paused. That meant they were planning another sedation cycle tonight, right now.
Above her, the alarm continued. She grabbed a portable data drive, shoved the logs into it, and closed all windows. As she turned to leave, the lab door clicked footsteps. A silhouette filled the doorway. A soldier suited in black corporate armor stood in front of her, shining a light straight at her face. Soldier, unauthorized synthetic detected, report unit code. Thea froze. Bud hid behind her leg. Chia, calculated calm. Unit code 671. Priority scan. Disabled returning to service. The soldier raised his rifle. Soldier. Power down, synthetic. Thea's eyes darted around. No escape path. Footsteps echoed outside. She braced, but Deck crashed through the supply crates behind the soldier, pulling him backward and disarming him before the man could fire. Deck didn't strike. He simply blocked the rifle and shoved him into a soft storage tarp. Not violent, just enough to remove danger. Thea blinked in relief. Thea, Deck, you got away. Deck, steady. Not away. Just moved. He saw Bud trembling, pressing against Thea. Deck frowned. Deck, you found something? She handed him the drive. Thea proof and warnings. They have plans for the Kalisk and for Bud. Deck studied Bud closely. The small creature pressed its glowing head to Deck's leg and closed its eyes. Deck exhaled softly. They needed to act now. 4. The prison of the Kalisk, Deck, and Thea emerged into the open again, this time heading straight toward the containment pen. The pen was a massive steel enclosure reinforced with beams, shock panels, and heavy gridding. The Kalisk sat hunched inside, its breath rising in misty jets. Its scales shimmered faintly in the floodlights. The guards around it were busy adjusting machinery. Deck counted them silently. 8. Thea analyzed their positions, marking openings. Deck moved close enough to see the creature's eye. It tracked him recognition, but also disappointment, as if asking, "Why did you run before finishing the test?" Deck inhaled slowly. He didn't break eye contact. His voice was steady through the mask. "Deck, I'm here now." Thea tugged his arm. "Thea, we're on a timer." Deck nodded and approached the cage control panel. He studied the wiring. Corporate tech was always layered with redundancy. He mapped its pattern mentally. Thea connected a cable into the access port. Her eyes flickered. They've locked the override. It won't open unless we physically disconnect the power couplers on the far side.
Deck turned his head slightly. Deck, I'll do it. Thea grabbed his wrist. Thea, Deck, those guards. You can't approach them. He tilted his head. Deck, I won't fight them. I'll misdirect them. He wasn't lying. It was time to hunt, not harm. 5. Misdirection. Deck activated his mask's cloaking shroud. Not a full invisibility, but enough to blur his outline in low light. He darted behind the first row of crates, then made a soft noise, something like a metallic click. A guard turned, rifle scanning. Deck moved again, tapping a pipe.
The guard reported. Sector C, movement detected. 2 more guards rushed to support him. Deck sprinted silently between their sight lines, triggering motion on the opposite side. They ran toward the noise. Deck slipped behind them, then into the shadows of the generator zone. He reached the couplers. 3 thick cables fed into the cage's shock grid. Deck examined them, each insulated, marked with numeric codes. THIA, comlink whisper. Coupler 3, second from the left. Shut it off manually. Deck braced himself and pulled. The coupler resisted. He pulled again. Thea's voice crackled. Thea! Hurry! Deck tore it free. The entire grid hummed down by 30%. 1 more. Bud suddenly chirped loudly. A guard turned. Deck froze. He was in full view. The guard raised his weapon. Deck reacted fast, but not with violence. He whipped the coupler he'd removed, tossing it toward a metal vat. It clanged loudly and rolled. The guard jerked toward the noise. Convinced something moved there, Deck slipped behind a panel.
Close call. He reached for the final coupler, pulled hard. Thia, calm. Power down complete. The cage lock is open. Deck sprinted toward the cage 6. The release. Thea had already opened a narrow gap in the bars. Bud squeezed through instantly, chittering at the Kalisk. The Kalisk lowered its head toward Bud. A recognition, a reunion. Its eyes softened. Deck stood before the cage. The Kalisk's gaze rose to meet his. It stepped forward, every movement sending a controlled ripple through its massive form. It didn't roar, didn't threaten, it waited. Deck stepped aside. The Kalisk emerged from the cage, towering above both him and Thea, scales shimmering in the moonlight. The ground vibrated as it walked. Guards shouted behind them. Deck didn't flinch. The Kalisk looked down at him one last time, and then it turned, crouching protectively around Bud. Deck realized it wasn't just an apex predator. It was a parent. Thea whispered, Thea, Deck, you passed its judgment.
Deck inhaled deeply. For the first time, the pressure in his chest lightened. Maybe he wasn't weak. Maybe he wasn't a mistake. Maybe the Kalisk, this legendary beast, saw something in him. Even Nyor didn't. Alarms rang louder. More troops rushed in. The Kalisk growled low, not violent, but warning. Deck's mask scanned the incoming heat signatures. Deck, we need to leave. Now. Thea grabbed Bud. The Kalisk glanced at Deck as if waiting for him to lead. Deck nodded. He pointed toward the ridge path. Decke, this way. They ran. Yautja, synthetic, creature, apex predator. A bizarre team, but united. Behind them, the camp erupted in chaos. Ahead of them, the forest opened like a path of fate.
Thea gave a faint, almost human smile. Thea, because you need help, and so do I. She gestured to her missing legs. Thai, if you help me retrieve my lower half, I can help you find what you're looking for. Deck paused. He didn't trust her, but he remembered Quay's last words. Live. He extended a hand. Thea took it, a Yautja and a synthetic, unlikely allies on a deadly world. Above them, leaves rustled. Something was watching. As they moved on, Bud kept close to Thea's legs, eyes bright and tongue flicking. The small creature had become a quiet presence that eased the edges of danger. The forest swallowed them like a lover closing a hand over a secret moonlight fractured through thick leaves. Frantic breaths melted into the ambient hum. Deck led with steadiness now, each step a practiced economy of motion. Thea supported Bud against her chest, the small creature's glow soft as a beacon.
Behind them, the sound of the Wayland-Yutani camp collapsing hulked and echoed. Alarms, metallic pounding, the shouted numeric calls of soldiers. The company would not let their prize walk away quietly. Deck's visor bled thermal readouts into the periphery of his view. Sentries flared orange, then winked out as Thea's spoofed signatures redirected patrols in arcs far from their path. She worked silently at his side, recalibrating the trails the pursuers would think they were on. This was not luck. This was orchestration. They reached a riverbed where the ground fell away into a shallow canyon, its edges plated with slick basalt. The Kalisk padded beside them, enormous and careful, its scales flickering with bioluminescent tracery. The creature kept closest to Bud, letting the juvenile slither between its foreclaws as if it were a child's toy. Every giant step it took set up a tiny percussion that the others felt through the soles of their feet. Deck glanced at the animal, and, for the first time since he fled the arena, let himself wonder at how thin the line between hunter and guardian could be. Njor's voice, the cold command, still cut at the edges of his mind. You are weak. But the sight of the Kalisk's patient care dissolved some of the old shame. Maybe strength could be gentleness. Maybe the clan had confused the two. More dogs, Thea whispered, tapping a display. Autonomous retrieval units, heavy cast frames. Light armor but highly persistent. They'll coordinate with human squads.
Deck's lips pressed into a line. We split up, he said. Kalisk and Bud go east. Thea and I route south. We draw them away from the Kalisk's escape path. Thea's processors ran scenarios quickly, then nodded. Affirmative. The Kalisk's heat signature is unique enough. Their pattern recognition will prioritize it. We must decoy before they lock on optical biomarkers. They moved in tight synchrony. Deck used his knowledge of planet flora to lay down scent distractors. Crushed luminous ferns that emitted a confusing heat trace. Sticky resin traps, baited with smoldering rock to trigger sensors on the false trail. Thea hacked municipal beacons with nimble code and turned power lines into false vectors. Bud darted ahead and then doubled back, weaving like a bright stitch through the darkness. The little creature had an easy, instinctive camouflage on Jenna, and it used that to their advantage.
Still, the pursuing drones and bots were relentless. The whine of rotors came first, a distant insect chorus that tightened into a swarm. Heat signatures tessellated in Deck's HUD as multiple units swept the tree line. Men with tactical rifles spilled through a stand of ghostly trees, hot lamps cutting the shade into slashes of white. Now, Deck breathed. He sprinted along a narrow ledge under a band of hanging moss, his boots silent against living wood. A drone's searchlight sliced overhead. The beam caught him, then missed. He dropped onto a lower branch and rolled through a tangle of neon vines, the sticky gel on his forearm, pulling but not pinning. The baited traps he'd set earlier kicked off, chiming false positives in one direction while he slipped in the other. The human response was immediate and well-drilled. Squads moved to investigate the false signals, clearing paths for retrieval bots. That was their advantage and their weakness. Linear doctrine, Deck used it like a blade.
As he broke away, the Kalisk's roars throbbed from the east like a thunder wall. In the canopy above him, something moved with a leather whisper. A large predatory creature, not the Kalisk, a separate life form native to Jenna, watched them with reflective eyes. It made no move. Jenna's predators were patient, and every eye could be a threat. Deck reminded himself to breathe at measured intervals. He practiced low and steady breathing in the arena. It served him well here too. They had run perhaps a mile when the ground changed. Sand sifted over shale, and jagged stone jutted into vertical teeth. The ridge they needed to cross looked narrow, but beyond it lay an open plain where the Kalisk could run. Deck signaled for a halt and peered at Thea. "We isolate the retrieval units first," he said. "Then we move. We don't let the company bracket us."
Thea's limbs twitched with algorithms. They have a repeater station on the South Ridge. If I can blind it for 30 seconds, their coordination collapses into manual triage. We could then shepherd Kalisk and Bud across, but we need to divert at least 4 bots to the north. Deck considered. The risk was high, but the alternative, running with the Kalisk under a barrage, would be worse. "Do it," he said. Thea crept off, tools slinging from a hip pouch, while Dek set primitive charges made from resin and sharpened spikes, not to maim, but to immobilize. He anchored them at choke points where machinery would drag and snap. Bud watched him with an almost human concentration, its small glow dim with focus.
At the node, Thea blended into the rock like a gray hand. Her fingers found cable and fiber. She fed a whisper of code into the system and tasted feedback, a second tick, and the nodes flickered. One by one, their beacons dipped. Drones stuttered, lost locks, sighed in midair, and descended like wounded insects. The human squads above swore and turned. Dek detonated the traps. They detonated not with explosion, but with a polymer bloom, a thick, tenacious field that wrapped around mechanical legs. Freezing servos and resin. The retrieval bots spun madly until their power cells stuttered. Men shouted, their formations unraveling into human confusion.
The Kalisk heard it, like an answering drum. The great creature unfurled its heavy neck and moved in a purposeful surge, dragging Bud close as if to shield him behind the river's rocky teeth. For a moment, Dek watched the beast's side flex. Then he felt the rawness of awe again. Here was a creature of teeth and scale that would not raise the world for itself. It kept a small life sheltered within its hulking frame. Thea gave a faint, almost human smile. "Thea, because you need help, and so do I." She gestured to her missing legs. "Thea, if you help me retrieve my lower half, I can help you find what you're looking for." Dek paused. He didn't trust her, but he remembered Quay's last words. "Live." He extended a hand. Thea took it. A Utja and a synthetic, unlikely allies on a deadly world. Above them, leaves rustled. Something was watching. As they moved on, Bud kept close to Thea's legs, eyes bright,